Hello and welcome back to Swedish Tales of Horror and Drama. Today we're going back to 1944 and tell the dramatic story of one of the most unfortunate air crashes ever. A Lockheed Lodestar with 15 people on board was on its way from Stockholm Bromma Airport to RAF Leuchars Airport in Scotland in the middle of the night between the 28th and 29th of August 1944. The plane was filled with Norwegian men and women that were active in the Norwegian resistance against the German occupation of Norway. This was during the Second World War, and that kind of flight was obviously very dangerous, with high risk of interception by German night fighters. Due to bad weather and radio problems, the pilots chose to fly on a very low altitude. At midnight, the plane crashed against the absolute summit of a small mountain, Kinnekulle, in the west of Sweden. The mountain is only a few feet higher than the flight altitude, and just a few feet higher altitude or a few hundred feet to the side, and they would have made it. Nazi Germany attacked Norway and Denmark on the night of 9th of April 1940. The Germans called the attack Operation Weserübung. Norway put up a much stronger resistance than the Germans had expected. On the first night, as German warships crept into the Oslofjord from the south, Norwegian coastal batteries opened fire and sank the German heavy cruiser Blücher. At the time, the Blücher was one of the very few heavy warships that Germany had at its disposal, and the loss of her was a hard blow to the Germans. However, the Germans were too powerful in the end, and the Norwegian king and government fled to England after a month or so. Norway surrendered to Germany on June 9th after just 2 months of fighting. A Norwegian government in exile was set up in London. However, the Norwegians continued to resist through sabotage and guerrilla warfare. Germany had a very large interest in a Norwegian factory producing heavy water in Wehrmacht. The interest was based on the fact that Hitler planned to make an atomic bomb, and heavy water was one of the raw materials in that process. Through a sabotage expedition with Norwegians resistance men organized from England, the factory in Wehrmacht was blown up, and Germany's atomic bomb was thus significantly delayed. The images show the sinking of Blücher, the heavy water factory, and a movie image from the sabotage. During the German occupation, more than 50,000 Norwegians fled to Sweden. Many of them wanted to get involved in the resistance movement and planned to return to Norway and fight against the Germans. The Swedish government was secretly very helpful to these resistance fighters. Clandestinely, training camps were organized for Norwegian men and women, and they were given uniforms, weapons, vehicles and other equipment. Some resistance men and women were also sent to England for special training in, for example, sabotage actions. 13,500 Norwegian soldiers were equipped and trained in this way in Sweden during the war. A large exercise was also conducted in 1945, and that exercise is still the largest exercise ever conducted by the Norwegian army. However, the war ended before these soldiers could be deployed in active combat. There were a great need for transports between Sweden and England during the war. The transports mainly concerned diplomats, mail and bearings. Ball bearings were in short supply in England, where the war industry was crying out for material. Sweden had the world's largest and most famous ball bearing producer, Swedish Ball Bearing Works, SKF. The Norwegian transports that this video tells about were part of the air traffic between Sweden and England. Almost every night Lockheed Lodestars flew between Sweden and Scotland. More than 3,000 such flights were carried out during the war, only for the Norwegian operations. The flights were in hand for Norwegian needs, but if there was space they also took Swedish diplomats, mail and bearings. The aircraft were officially owned by BOAC, but secretly it was the Norwegian state that owned them. The picture shows a Lockheed Lodestar preserved in a Norwegian aviation museum, painted as they were during the war. The Lockheed Lodestar has a wingspan of about 20 meters and a maximum takeoff weight of about 8 tons. They have two Wright Cyclone engines of 1200 horsepower each and could carry 15 passengers plus cargo. At Bromma Airport in Stockholm there was a hangar as a base for the operations. The hangar was called the English hangar and is still there, but today houses a shop for electrical items. Inside the hangar the planes were secretly loaded with bearings, mail and Norwegian's resistance fighters. They were then rolled out and started for Scotland in the evening to pass the dangerous area closest to Germany in the middle of the night. Here you can see the route they flew. They deviated a little from the route both to the north and to the south on different nights so that the Germans would not be able to predict the exact route and send out the night fighters. One can see that the straight course between Bromma and Leuchars in Scotland passes right past the small mountain Kinnekulle marked with a green dot. On the dramatic and very unlucky night between the 28th and 29th of August 1944, a Lodestar took off as usual in the evening at about 9 p.m. It had 2 pilots, 1 radio operator and 12 passengers. Norwegian resistance soldiers on their way to sabotage training in England. The airport in the picture is RAF Leuchars in Scotland. The weather on the night in question was very bad with strong winds, low cloud base and heavy rain. It was pitch black in the middle of the night and it was raining heavily. The radio equipment on board was malfunctioning and the pilots had difficulty calculating their position. To maintain some ground awareness, they decided to fly at an altitude of only 1,000 feet, just below the clouds. Mostly they didn't see anything at all anyway, but could occasionally catch a glimpse of lights from a passing city. On their way across Sweden there was only one height obstacle, and that was the small mountain Kinnekulle on the eastern side of Lake Vänern. Kinnekulle is 1018 feet high. At midnight the plane crashes right on the top of Kinnekulle. Had they only flown 20 feet higher or 200 feet to either side, they would have been just fine. The plane is almost completely destroyed and fires start in the wreckage. However, the fires are soon extinguished by the rain. Local residents have noted the crash and rescue personnel soon arrive at the scene. In the devastation they find 4 survivors and 11 dead. The rescue work became very difficult in the rugged terrain with darkness and rain. These are pictures from the accident scene on August the 29th, the day after the unfortunate crash. A monument has been raised at the accident site on top of the mountain. There are a short summary and the names of those who died. Those who perished in the accident were resistance soldiers and pilots. They were willing to risk their lives and would sure have rather died in battle against German occupiers, but nevertheless they gave their lives in the fight against Germany's occupation of Norway. They were true heroes. Rest in peace.